Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this lecture on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, commonly referred as UNCAC. This lecture forms a part of the course International Anti-Corruption Mechanisms offered within the Master's Program in Governance and Anti-Corruption. Before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Farwani Amal Linda, and I am an assistant professor of public law in the Department of Organizational Management at the Higher National School of Management in Algeria. I earned my PhD in public law from Abu Bakr Belqaid University of Tlemcen. My contact information, including my email address and office hours, is provided on this slide and may be used should you require any further clarification regarding the course. Having briefly introduced myself, let us now turn to the objectives of today's lecture. By the end of this lecture, students should be able to define corruption and explain its major implications. They should also understand the rationale behind international anti-corruption mechanisms and identify the objectives and guiding principles of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Furthermore, students will be encouraged to analyze the convention's main provisions and critically assess its role in addressing corruption at the international level. And before examining this issue in greater details, it is important to review the prerequisite knowledge required for this lecture. And to fully engage with the content of this lecture, students are expected to possess a basic understanding of public law and international law, as well as familiarity with the concepts of governance, accountability, and transparency. Students also should be able to analyze legal texts and critically assess institutional framework. Since we have outlined the prerequisite knowledge, let us now consider the structure of today's lecture. The lecture is organized into main parts. The first part provides a general overview of corruption and the rationale behind the development of international anti-corruption mechanisms. Particular attention will be devoted to the emergence of international cooperation in this field. The second part focuses on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, examining its historical background, objectives, and principal provisions. And to introduce our lecture, we should say that corruption constitutes a major challenge that undermines economic development, democratic governance, and public trust in public institutions. As corruption increasingly transcends national borders, states have developed international legal and institutional mechanisms aimed at preventing and combating corruption practices. Among these mechanisms, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, adopted in 2003, represents the first universal and legally binding instrument dedicated to the fight against corruption. Now, let us turn to the first part of this lecture, which is a general overview. And in the general overview, it is mandatory to start by knowing what is corruption. Corruption may generally be defined as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It affects both the public and private sectors and may take various forms, including bribery, embezzlement, fraud, abuse of office, and illicit enrichment. Beyond its legal dimension, corruption has significant economic and social and political consequences. It weakens public institutions, undermines citizens' trust, and hinders sustainable development. Now, for the next question concerns the need for international mechanisms to address it. Why international anti-corruption mechanism? Now, the growing internationalization of economic and political relations have given has given corruption a transnational dimension that often exceeds the capacity of national legal systems. As a result, international anti corruption mechanisms have emerged to facilitate cooperation among states, to promote harmonization of legal frameworks, and to strengthen transparency, accountability, and good governance. These mechanisms also contribute to the exchange of information and best practices in the fight against corruption. The international effort has gradually led to the establishment of various forms of cooperation, which will be examined in the following section. Now, since the 19th, corruption has increasingly been recognized as a global challenge requiring coordinated responses. Now, the international and the regional organizations, including the United Nations, the OECD, and the World Bank, have played a central role in developing legal instruments and institutional frameworks designed to combat corruption. This process eventually culminated in the adoption of the United Nations Convention against Corruption in 2003. And having examined the broader context, we may now turn to the convention itself, which the part which is the part 2 of this lecture. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in October 2003 and entered into force in December 2005. UNCNC represents the first universal and legally binding international instrument specifically dedicated to combating corruption. Its adoption reflects the growing recognition that corruption constitutes a shared challenge requiring collective action at the international level. The convention established a comprehensive framework that extends beyond criminalization to include prevention, international cooperation, and asset recovery. Let us now examine the objectives and guiding principle of the Convention. The Convention pursues several fundamental objectives. First, it seeks to promote and strengthen measures aimed at preventing and combating corruption more effectively. Second, it aims to facilitate international cooperation and technical assistance among states. Finally, UNCAC promotes integrity, accountability, transparency, and sound public administration while emphasizing the importance of recovering assets acquired through corrupt practices. These objectives are reflected in the Convention principal pillars, which constitute the final substantive component of today's lecture. The UNCAC is structured around five main pillars. The first concerns preventive measures intended to reduce opportunities for corruption through institutional reforms. The second pillar addresses criminalization and law enforcement by requiring states to establish various corruption-related offenses. The third pillar focuses on international cooperation, while the fourth concerns asset recovery. Finally, the Convention encourages technical assistance and the exchange of information among states. Having reviewed the principal components of UNCAC, let's conclude this lecture. To conclude, corruption remains one of the major challenges facing contemporary societies and requires coordinated responses at both the national and international levels. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption represents a cornerstone of international anti-corruption framework by promoting prevention, criminalization, cooperation, and asset recovery. The final slide provides the main references used to prepare this lecture. Students are encouraged to consult these materials in order to deepen their understanding of the topic discussed today. Finally, thank you for your attention.